Well, I'm really sorry, but do you believe he's going to stop the boats? Because I don't. Does he believe he's going to stop the boats? No, I don't think he does. And the idea that the Conservative Party is united on this or any other issue is for the birds. Now, look, we're used to political leaders of whether it be a governing party or an opposition party putting the best spin they can on things. But I just begin to get the feeling that no longer do we believe a single word this man is saying. And this is very much backed up by a YouGov poll that was out in the Times today, and it makes pretty grim reading for the Conservatives. It shows them now down to 20% in the opinion polls, with Reform, who, frankly, have not had a great deal of publicity, no major celebs joining them or anything like that, creeping up on 12%, and Labour with a massive, massive lead. Now, political parties have good times and bad times, and back in 2019, the Conservative Party had a very, very tough time, which I had quite a bit to do with. But they got out of that mess by Theresa May resigning, Boris Johnson coming in, and them saying, right, we finally get it. We understand you. We are going to deliver Brexit. We are going to take back control. And many millions of Brexit voters thought that also meant taking back control of our borders, reducing the numbers of people coming in to our country. They had a stonking majority of 80 seats. And what have they done for the last 4 years? Well, they spent most of it arguing among themselves, navel-gazing, arguments within the Conservative Party without much thought as to what the rest of the country really needs. And I never thought I'd really ask this question, but I'm going to debate tonight. Is the Conservative Party in terminal decline? I want your thoughts on this, please. Farage at gbnews.com or tweet #Farage on GB News. Why do I say that? I feel that the loss of confidence in the Conservative Party from 2019 Conservative voters is now at catastrophic levels. I'm not even sure there's anything they can do between now and the next election to get that support back. And whilst the first past the post system is what's kept in place two-party politics, remember, before the First World War, the Liberal Party were the governing party. They were ultimately, I accept it took a great war, it took the emancipation of women, but they were replaced by the Labour Party. I wonder whether there is any point to the Conservative Party. And I say that because they'll always argue amongst divisions that we're a broad church. But even a broad church needs a religion of some kind to believe in. I'm not sure they've actually got this anymore. I think they're not fit for purpose. I think they're on the way out. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Conservative Member of Parliament for North East Somerset, probably the nearest thing to a party loyalist one could ever meet, a true believer in the Conservative Party. Jacob, since about 1834, I think that's roughly the date when the modern Conservative Party has been recognisable as it is, has it ever been in graver danger than it is now?
Oh, yes, indeed. From 1846 to 1874, the Conservatives don't form a majority government. They split over the Corn Laws.
Yes.
The Peelites go off really with Gladstone to the Liberal Party, and Disraeli reforms the Conservative Party as a patriotic party that represents everybody in the country. Exactly, actually, what Boris was doing
in
2019, which was interrupted. And the key for the Conservative Party is that we get back to representing the people who voted for us in 2019. And at the moment, they're with Donald Trump. They think of the handsome Mr. Farage. I don't know if you've seen this poll, but 54% of them trust you, as opposed to 35% who trust the Prime Minister. And what we've done wrong is move away from our core supporters, and we've been set off course over the boats issue by some people who hold the EU effectively, I mean, they're calling it the ECHR at the moment, in higher regard than their own voters. And that's been why Rishi couldn't go further on the boats. I supported all the amendments, but there just wasn't a majority in Parliament for it. And I think there's a much bigger political problem. It's not the Tories, it's there is this disconnect between voters and those who are in charge, between the electors and the elected.
Well, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
And we can fix that, because we've done it before. If you take the whole history of the Tory party, you go back to the beginning of the 18th century, we have had long periods when we haven't made that connection, and we haven't succeeded, but we've always managed to come back to get close to voters. That's what it's all about.
However, 20% is a very low number. Professor Matt Goodwin, and for the purposes of this debate, importantly, pollster.
Yeah.
These numbers are dire, aren't they?
They're very dire. I mean, the Conservative Party is on life support. And you think about why the Conservative Party historically has been one of the most successful parties in the history of democracy. It's because of its power to renew. It's renewed its ideology, it's renewed its electorate. But after 2019, after renewing itself around the Brexit divide, I think what strikes me is that the Conservative Party doesn't really know how to speak to the voters it inherited from Brexit. And so if you look at what's going to happen to the party at the next election, Nigel, with these poll numbers, the MPs who are left, they're not red wall MPs, they're not northern MPs, they're Oxbridge-educated southern Conservative MPs of a more liberal mindset. So the idea that after this catastrophic defeat, which the polls suggest is en route, I don't really think the Conservative Party is going to pivot back and say, well, let's rebuild this electorate. I think they're going to go into their comfort zone. And the problem is that comfort zone is university towns, big cities, social liberals, and they're not going to vote Conservative for a very long time.
One of the differences, Jacob, if you go back into history, you're quite right. I mean, Peel did the right thing in 1846, the right thing for the country, but the wrong thing for the party at that moment in time and for the next 22 years, or whatever it was. But there was no political party to challenge directly the Conservatives. You had the Whigs, the Liberals. But now, and we've seen this over the years with UKIP and the Brexit Party, now you've got Reform. Now there is a challenger.
Well, you know perfectly well, because you've made this point. The Brexit Party had the great advantage in the European elections of proportional representation. You also had brilliant candidates, including one Annunziata REES-MOGG, which I think inspired the nation. And that meant that people could vote for the Brexit Party knowing that it would lead directly to MEPs. The issue now is that, yes, Reform's on 12%, but it won't win a single seat. And it may well help turf out some quite proper Conservatives, people you would find a lot in common with.
Do you mean quite proper Conservatives who've overseen massive tax rises, a huge increase of the size of the state,
I mean quite proper,
open borders, legal immigration at levels we've never seen?
I mean quite proper Conservatives who, like me, voted for the amendments last week to toughen up. You didn't
vote against it ultimately, Jacob, did you?
No, because the bill was better than what we've currently got. And is there any point? Oh, yes. I mean, I'm not confident it's going to lead planes leaving quickly. If we had time, it could.
But this argument, Jacob, this argument, you might vote out some good chaps that exist within the Conservative Party. I don't know what percentage of the parliamentary party would be with a centre of public opinion on immigration, maybe 20% of you, no more than that. But the point is this. If the public think at the next election that Labour is going to win anyway, the idea that, well, don't vote for them because they're not going to win many seats, that fades away.
I don't think it does, because you have the question of, do you really want Labour to have a majority of 150? And do you want them to have a complete free-for-all?
Well, they might have it anyway.
As Blair had. And I do think you make one important point. You imply something very important, that when discussing this, one has to be very careful not to imply we are entitled to any voters.
No, well, I've been making this point.
Reform is not taking our voters. We are failing to inspire our voters. And even more than the people going to Reform are the people who are intending to stay at home. It's a bigger number of people, and in my view, ones it's easier to bring back if only we would say things that inspire them, which are the sort of things Boris was saying.
Jacob may well be right, but there's no leadership in the current Tory party going to bring those people back, is there, Matt?
Rishi Sunak's ratings are at a new low. There is no enthusiasm for the Rishi Sunak project, as we can see in the polls. Here's one interesting scenario to put out there, which I think differs from, say, the UKIP and the Brexit Party experiment. What if at the spring Reform is polling above the Conservative Party? That could be interesting, because going back to the 50s, there's a very famous French academic, Maurice Duverger, and he said the problem with first-past-the-post systems for challenger parties, like Reform, is that many voters look at them and say they're a wasted vote. But if they look at the national polls and they see Reform polling potentially above the Conservative Party, that changes the dynamic. And this, of course, is what the SDP never quite managed to do. It's what UKIP never quite managed to do, which is present itself as a credible alternative. And if that happens, everything's off the table.
The SDP did, though. In 1981, the SDP were polling over 50%. And in the 1983 election, they were in 1%, 2%?
So they got 25.3%.
And they got
23 seats, and Labour got 27 and a bit percent and 209 seats.
That's right. And that is the fundamental issue with first past the post, and it makes it difficult for challenger parties, even if they're getting close to the incumbent party.
There's one exception to that, and that's Canada 30 years ago.
Yes.
Where an incumbent Conservative Party with a majority and doing about as badly in the polls as the British Conservative Party is now, faced a party, oddly, called Reform. And they literally disappeared down to two seats. So it can happen.
Oh, extraordinary results can happen. And first past the post tends to exaggerate in one way or the other.
Because it can invert, can't it?
That's right, that's right. There's a tipping point.
I also wonder if I'm a 2019 Conservative MP, I'm thinking, I'm going to lose my seat. Why wouldn't I defect? Why wouldn't I leave? Why wouldn't I go out with a bang and think, you know what, actually, chances are I might have a better chance in this seat, in this red wall seat, under a Reform banner than under a Conservative banner. And I think that's another variable, a kind of known unknown in this election that may yet see a number of MPs say, I'm going to, roll the dice here. I'm going to try something different because I'm leaving politics anyway.
History suggests that Jacob's arguments are right.
Sure.
But is there a chance that this could be a real moment of historic change?
The chance is one issue, which is immigration. Throughout the 20th century, the Conservatives, throughout the 19th century, the Conservatives endured. But we are now in a world where identity and cultural issues matter just as much to voters, in fact, more to voters than economic issues. If you ask Boris Johnson's voters today, what is your top priority? They say stopping the boats. They don't say cost of living crisis. They say stopping the boats. So immigration could be the new Brexit. It could be the issue that cuts across left and right. And if Reform are picking up now about 15% of Boris Johnson's voters, what if that starts to go up? What if it's 25%, 35%, and they start to eat into some of the working class voters and the apathetic voters who are saying, I'm not going to vote at all? Then things start to change dramatically. And one thing I would say, look at the British election study, the premier study of the country's politics. That shows over the last decade, 60% of voters have changed their minds from one election to the next. We've never seen this before. So volatility, the churn in the system, has never been as high as it is today.
That is a very fair point.
That's an extremely important point. And you just have to look at Labour in Scotland and Labour in the Red Wall to see how willing people are to change their minds. I mean, Labour in Scotland is quite extraordinary and something none of us ever thought we'd see happen.
No.
Reform has a challenge. And, Nigel, you are part of this challenge.
Sure.
I mean, if you think the SDP, with Roy Jenkins and Shirley Williams and so on, and David Owen particularly, really big figures, could not get through that hurdle. I just don't think there's any way Reform without you can do it, and you have an important decision to make.
Well, it's very good of you, Jacob, to put it back on me right at the end of this debate. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. And, folks, historically, of course the Conservative Party will survive all of this. I just don't know. Something just perhaps feels a little bit different.